Can we really assess the system, the culture, the way we would an individual? Can we sit with it, understand it, without forcing our own story onto it?
And what does it really mean to be authentic in that room, in that process? Not just saying we're authentic, but living it.
Today on the Slog Pod, we're asking, can we meet a system where it is? What does that take and why does it matter? Not just for organizations, but for the wider culture we all live in.
Welcome to the Slog Pod, where culture, systems, and self all get put under the same uncomfortable lens.
When we started the Slog Co, one of the questions that kept coming up for us was, can you apply what we do in therapy and individual therapy to a whole system or a culture? In therapy, I'm trained to sit with the person in front of me as they are, not as I wish they were, not as the insurance form says they should be. The question is, can we do that with an organization or with a larger culture?
And what does that take? Because we've both sat through a lot of culture work, leadership training, DEI programs, and too often it feels so performative. It's just not authentic. It's not meeting the system where it is. It's performing where we wish it was.
And you can feel the disconnect in the room. You feel the bullshit. People shut down, nothing shifts, nothing changes. So the question for us became, how do we show up real? And what does that really mean to be genuine in this work? And what does that really mean to be authentic in this work and to be where the culture or the system is? We throw this word around, authentic, genuine, but what does that really look like? To us, it starts with being clear about what you see, naming what's present, even if it's uncomfortable, admitting what you don't know, and not performing for the sake of optics.
And even more than that, I think it's about being curious. It's about not coming in with a fixed plan or a pre-planned agenda, but it's asking, what's really happening here? What's going on? What are we protecting? What's driving the behavior?
And I think that this drives or is driven by that individual therapeutic approach, which is the same. It seems like we can do that, which means sitting in front of someone, in this case, sitting in front of a culture or a system and asking those same questions, not judging, but just seeing and assessing where it is. In other words, being authentic isn't about being casual or transparent. It's about being present, honest, willing to sit with the tension of what it is, the tension of what it is.
So what does it mean to meet the system where it is? Let's talk about that, because I think it's really easy to say, but it's harder in practice.
Absolutely. So it means this: you don't walk in assuming the system is ready for change. You don't tell the system where it needs to go. You start by observing. What stories are being told? Is there a narrative? Is everybody in on that narrative? What's being defended? Where's the discomfort? Where's the shame? Is there a poor outcome? It's about seeing the whole thing, the resistance, the fear, the aspiration, without trying to rush it or bypass it.
Or maybe without trying to direct it or lead it. You've talked a lot about open-ended questions, why that's so important. It's why you wouldn't go into a therapy session with a client with a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions that you've already come up with to lead them to something. The goal in therapy is to ask them open-ended questions so they can get there on their own.
Absolutely. That's how therapy begins. I'm often asked about that by clients. Where do you want to go today? They'll say. And that's not for me to determine. And I think the same goes for our systems and our culture. I leave it open-ended because when you leave it open-ended, you see where it naturally goes, where the natural problems are, if there are problems, what the natural thought processes are, where the judgments are, where people are being, as we've talked about, performative. You start to recognize these narratives that are being told, whether it's, I can think of all sorts of examples surrounding, can I trust? Can I trust my coworkers? Can I trust my boss? Can I say this? Can I be direct? Am I safe? Think of how many things that surround just that. How should I feel in this moment? Am I in the right position? Do I have the right job? all these, there's so much there. And if you walk in and you're meeting the system where it is or the individual, which are both, I think you get a much clearer picture of what's happening if you just leave it open-ended like that.
Mm-hmm. So similarly to how you would interact with that individual client, it's the same for a culture or a system that we're trying to take on.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to explore. And I know that's hard, and it takes practice. It takes humility. It takes letting go of our own ego and that idea that we need to fix something or look good, perform in that process.
You know, I state it like it's easy. It's very difficult. And I think especially in our organizations, it's difficult because leaders want to control it. And they want to say, this is the narrative. It may not be. They want to know. They may not know. It's interesting. That's why I love the therapeutic process, the psychotherapeutic process, because it lets it find out for itself where it's going, what's actually happening. So I know I say that it's easy, but it's very difficult. Which brings us to, why is it so difficult? Why don't more leaders, more consultants, more culture efforts start here?
I think first, fear. Fear is always a big one. Systems tend to want to protect themselves. And I think that authenticity, that genuineness disrupts those fragile systems. And it shakes loose things that feel dangerous, unsafe, or unknown to those systems.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Second, I think conditioning. We talk about biases, conditioning. We're trained to perform, to present the right answers. If you can place yourself back in those positions of being in meetings or talking with a boss or a superior, having to know the right answers, to market ourselves as having the solution. I think that's a big one. Slowing down and sitting in curiosity runs counter to all of that. We're basically, again, open-ended, seeing where this goes and saying, I don't know, rather than I do know, and this is the solution. It's just a different take.
Yeah. I think another thing, and I would list this third, is shame.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you really meet a system where it is, get on that level, what you'll find is you're going to see what's broken. And there's often shame involved with that. I think both for the individual and collectively. It takes a lot of emotional maturity to stay in that space and not go back into that performative, I don't want to get real here because it's uncomfortable.
I might add something to that too. Not just shame. I think it's a lot of emotions come into that. It can be blame or just, we mentioned fear before, but it can be all sorts of different things that come into that process. So yes, third, shame. I think that's a big thing when it comes to systems or what you should be. It's hard to say shame because I think that that's a very complex word, but at the same time, it defines a lot of things. It really expresses what we're talking about here. And here's the big question. Why does this matter? Why are we making this the foundation of what we do at the Slog Co? In my mind, we're doing this because if we don't do this, nothing changes. I'm not sure that anybody's taken necessarily this approach. And it seems reasonable to me because I've seen outcomes with individuals. So I don't know why we couldn't have the same outcomes in systems, in culture, if we're truly being genuine, authentic, and being where that system is. You can slap new values on the wall of your organization. You can run 100 workshops, leadership trainings, you name it. But if you haven't created the conditions for people to be real and for the system to be seen, you've changed nothing.
Yeah, you're right. And it's not just companies. Again, let's zoom out. It's the larger culture. It's our society, all of it. Why do we get so stuck? I think it's because, like you said, we can't sit with what's real. We have a tough time actually seeking truth or even identifying what it is because we're stuck in a not real place. We can't handle that discomfort.
Yeah, that's no different than an individual. Same thing, right?
It's just so easy to just jump straight into the spin, blame, distraction, alternate explanations for what's really going on that are more comfortable for us. I wonder what would happen if, again, looking at the culture, if we just slowed down and asked, what's really going on here? I think that's what we're trying to do with this podcast, is look at this deeper and as real as we can and just identify and name, what are we actually looking at?
Yeah, that's the deeper hope, right? Not just for organizations, but for our wider culture, that we can get better at this. We can become more curious, more honest, more willing to meet people where they are. We might actually move forward if we're okay with that. I think. I'm not sure. Obviously, we're asking questions when we go through this, but it makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. And we're trying it. Correct? I mean, if it works for an individual, if it works in a group setting, why couldn't we try to at least approach our systems this way? I think it's worth a shot.
Yeah. So maybe we'll leave everyone with a few questions, one we ask ourselves all the time, right? So, where in my life or my work am I performing instead of being present? Do you think you could give an honest answer to that?
That's a tough one.
And think of yourself in the systems that you live in and the pressures that are in those social systems or the culture that you are in. Could you give yourself an honest answer about what that is? When are you performing? Do you even recognize when you're performing?
I think a lot of times I know I am. I'm a very performative person. I'm probably performing right now to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I've been conditioned to do. But I love that you said, if I ask myself the question, now I'm trying to identify and catch myself doing it. That's that self-awareness, self-reflection thing that I think is so important on the pathway to change.
Sure. So where am I trying to fix before I've seen what's there? This is a common thing in individual therapy too, that we jump to right away when we see it. We want to fix it. I think all therapists feel this. I think all therapy clients feel this, that you want the fix very quickly. Like, okay, now that we've got the problem, or at least we're starting to define the problem or problems, I want the fix.
But maybe that ignores what the client needs in that case. Maybe they need to sit with that for a little while so it can start to sink in, so they can really admit it's happening. I think when you want to jump to the solution so quickly, that's more about you than it is about the client. And that's not meeting them where they are.
Exactly. And also, I would say that oftentimes what I've seen in individual therapy is that more will bubble to the surface. And I think that that happens within our systems too, where you identify a problem, but it's not just that one problem. There's many other influences that are impacting that problem that you're probably not looking at. So you're not holding the whole picture. You're only holding a little piece of it because you think, well, that's where this is coming from. So I'm gonna snuff out that fire. It doesn't necessarily work. So I think sitting in it and just letting it kind of simmer before you quote unquote fix it is a great idea. I also ask, what might shift if I slowed down and got curious first? Within that, as we're talking about what that looks like to sit in it, that's about that curiosity. Let's keep asking the questions and see where this goes. And I think in our systems, in our culture, let's keep asking those questions and getting answers. And then we can take the whole picture, put it together, start determining solutions and fixes.
Yeah. So really it comes down to whether it's a team, an organization, even again, with our larger culture, the question I'm hearing is, could this mindset change that we have change the conversation? Because we're approaching it differently. What can be different about how the conversation goes if we adjust how we're entering it, how we're conducting it, and what our pace is within it?
Absolutely.
Well, if any of this resonates, we'd love to hear about it. Shoot us a DM. Tell us what you're thinking, what you're seeing in this world.
Or in your world.
Or your world.
And your systems, and your companies, and your organizations, in the greater culture. Again, we're looking at this from a macro perspective too. So we're trying to look at everything, top to bottom, and be open to seeing what that is. not just our organizational lives, our political lives, the national macro culture, but everything that has to do with our everyday culture, interpersonal culture, all of it. We're asking the questions about everything, I think, right? And if you've got ways of practicing this or want to share that, we'd love to hear from you. So we're always in the process ourselves, and we're asking to hear new solutions, new ideas about that. So let us know.
And until next time, keep slogging.
Cheers.